Doing today?
Pretty tired. That's okay.
Hanging in there. We're almost done. We only have like a week and a half left. This kind of went fast. Um, Although two of the three of you are sticking around for the next half as well, so we're not almost done. So we'll start with your presentation, Val. If you can share your screen with us.
Okay. Says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh yeah. Oops. What the heck? Oops. Okay, now try.
Okay. Um, okay. Am I good to start?
Yep.
Okay, so today I'll be talking about the trunk and spine and all the musculature attached with that. First off, here, I'm just going to move you guys over here. So first off, I'll be talking about the spine and kind of the neck and throat and how they are connected to the cervical spine. So there's three muscle groups in this. There's the suprahyoid muscles, and these muscles are responsible for the floor of the oral cavity, and they help elevate the hyoid, which is kind of like the tongue bone, and they anchor the tongue and move the larynx superiorly during swallowing. And then there's the infrahyoid muscles, and these muscles are like strap-like muscles that depress the hyoid bone and larynx during swallowing and speaking. And then there's the pharyngeal constrictor muscles. All right, so first up, suprahyoid muscles, there's a digastric muscle, and the origin of this is the lower border of the jaw, and the insertion is the common tendon. Origin is the lower border of the jaw, and the insertion is the common tendon on the hyoid bone. And the action with this is that it opens the mouth and depresses the mandible, and the blood supply for this is the facial artery, and nerve supply or innervation is the tegmental nerve, which is my understanding is a cranial nerve, and part of this is the myohyoid branch as well. Then next is the styloid, and the origin for this is the back and lateral surface of the styloid process, kind of right next to like the temporal bone. You can't really see it here, but it's kind of back there. And then the insertion will be the body of the hyoid bone. And the action is that it elevates and retracts the hyoid. The blood supply for this is superior thyroid artery and lingual artery. And then the nerve innervation is the facial nerve. Then next is the myohyoid bone, and the origin is the medial surface of the mandible. The insertion is the body of the hyoid and median raft between both muscles. And the action is that it raises the floor of the mouth, elevates hyoid, and depresses the mandible. The blood supply for this is the superior thyroid artery, lingual artery, and the nerve innervation is the trigeminal nerve, so same as the gastric, and the myohyoid branch. And so this is just kind of a better image of the hyoid bone. It's a U-shaped bone and is better known as the tongue bone as well. All right, so next we have the genihyoid, which is better known as like the tongue muscle right here. And the origin is the inferior mental spine of the mandible. The insertion is the anterior body of the hyoid one, and the action is that it elevates and protracts the hyoid. The blood supply is the lingual artery, and nerve innervation is the first cervical spinal nerve. Okay. So next we have the infrahyoid bone. First is the omohyoid bone, and this is the origin of this is the medial end of the scapula. right over here. And then the insertion of this is the lower border of the body of the hyoid. And then this depresses the hyoid bone, and the blood supply is the infrahyoid artery, lingual artery, superior cervical artery. Nerve supply goes through cervical 1 through 3 through the ansa cervicalis. And then there's the sternothyroid, and the origin is the posterior surface of the manubrium, so on top of the sternum here. And then the insertion is the thyroid cartilage. The action is that it depresses the hyoid and larynx, and the blood supply is that it is the superior thyroid artery, and their supply is the same as the omohyoid bone, with it going through cervical 1 through cervical 3, and the ansa cervicalis. Then there is the thyroid hyoid. The origin for the thyroid hyoid is the thyroid cartilage. The insertion is the hyoid bone, and the action is that it depresses the hyoid bone and elevates thyroid cartilage. The blood supply is the superior thyroid artery, and the nerve supply is the first cervical nerve through the hypoglossal. Right. Then there is the sternohyoid. The origin of this is the posterior surface of the sternum and of the clavicle. Sorry, over here. And then the insertion lower margin of the hyoid bone. And the blood supply is the superior thyroid artery. Nerve supply is same as the other three, with going through cervical 1 through 3 through the ansa cervicalis. Then next is the pharyngeal constrictor muscles, and this helps with propelling food bowels to the esophagus as well. So the origin for the superior pharyngeal constrictor muscle is that it is anterior to the mandible pterygoid plate, and then the middle origin, then the middle pharyngeal constrictor muscle. The origin is the hyoid bone. So right there, got our image right there. And then the laryngeal cartilages, pharyngeal constrictor muscles are inferior, kind of near the larynx. And then the insertion is the posterior median raphe of pharynx, and the action for this is that it constricts pharynx during swallowing. And the nerve supply is at the pharyngeal pleox and branches of the vagus nerve. Here's just a better image showing all like the neck muscles and kind of where they attach to. So just a more detailed picture of this. All right, and then we have the anterolateral muscles, and these are responsible for rotating the head to each side. And first we have the sternocleidomastoid. The origin of this is the upper manubrium of the sternum. The insertion is the mastoid process of the temporal lobe, and the nucleate line of the occipital bone. The action is that it flexes and laterally rotates the head. And the blood supply for this is the occipital artery, superior thyroid artery, and the nerve innervation is the accessory nerve, which goes through like cervical 2 and cervical 3. And then the scalenus, over here, the origin for this is the posterior tubercles of the transverse processes of the lower 2 or 3 cervical vertebrae. The insertion is the outer surface of the second rib, and the action is that it elevates the first 2 ribs, flexes and rotates neck. Blood supply is the ascending cervical artery, and the nerve supply is the cervical spinal nerves. Then next is the intrinsic muscles of the back. We have the splenius, and the origin is that it is the lower half of ligamentum nuchae and spinous process of 7 cervical vertebrae through the upper 3, 4 vertebrae. The insertion is the mastoid process of temporal bone and occipital bone, and then the action is that it supports the head in an erect position and extends the head. The blood supply is the muscular branches of the aorta. Then nerve supply is the dorsal rami of medial cervical spinal nerves. Next we have the splenius cervicus. The origin is the spinous process of thoracic vertebrae 3 through thoracic vertebrae 6. The insertion is the transverse processes of cervical vertebrae 1 through 3. The action is the same as capitis, with it keeping the head in an erect position and extending the head as well. And then the blood supply is the occipital artery and transverse cervical artery. Nerve supply is the dorsal rami of spinal nerves. Okay, and then next we have the erector spinae, which is the spinalis. The origin is the spinous processes of the first 2 lumbar and the last 2 thoracic vertebrae. The insertion is the spinous process of the upper thoracic vertebrae. The action is that it extends the spine. The blood supply is that it is posterior intercostal arteries, and the nerve supply is that it is the dorsal rami, which is a spinal nerve as well. Okay, so the erector spinae continue. There's also the longissimus. The origin of this is the transverse process of the lumbar spine through cervical vertebrae. The insertion for this is the transverse processes of all thoracic vertebrae into the lower 9 to 10 ribs, into the tubercles and angles. Action is that it extends and laterally flexes the spine, helps compress the ribs, and extends and rotates the head towards the same side. Then the blood supply is the posterior intercostal arteries, and the nerve innervation is the dorsal rami spinal nerve. Okay, and then next the erector spinae is the iliocostalis, and the origin of this is like the iliac crest around here, and the lateral portion of the common erector spinae tendon. The insertion is the inferior borders of the angles of the lower 6 or 7 ribs. The action is that it extends and laterally flexes the spine and extends and rotates the head towards the same side. The blood supply is that it is the posterior intercostal arteries. Nerve supply is that is the dorsal rami, which is the spinal nerve as well. The neck and the intrinsic back muscles is the semispinalis, and then right here is the capitis. The origin of this is the tips of the transverse process of the upper 6 or 7 thoracic and the 7 cervical vertebrae, and from the arctic process of the 3 cervical above this. The insertion is between the superior and inferior nuchal lines of the occipital bone, so right above here. And then the action, together the semispinalis can extend the vertebral column and head and rotate them to the opposite side. And then the blood supply is the deep cervical artery. Nerve supply is the dorsal rami of the spinal nerves as well. All right, and then here, next up on the semispinalis is the cervixus, and this kind of lies under the capitis, and the origin of this is the transverse process of thoracic vertebrae 1 through 6. The insertion of this is the spinous process of cervical vertebrae 2 through 7. And like I said, together, the semispinalis can extend the vertebral column and head and rotate them to the opposite side. Then the blood supply is the deep cervical artery, and the nerve supply is the spinous process of cervical 2 through 7. So next up is the thoracis, right along here, and the origin of this is the transverse process of thoracic vertebrae 6 through 12. The insertion is the spinous process through C6 through T4, and the action, like I said, can extend the vertebral column and head and rotate them to the opposite side. Blood supply for this is the deep cervical artery, and the nerve innervation is the dorsal rami. Okay, then next for the back muscles is the thoracic, and then this attaches. The origin for this is the iliac crest and lumbar fossa. The insertion is the transverse processes of the upper lumbar vertebrae and lower margin of the floating ribs. Bless you. And the action is that it flexes the spine laterally, and the blood supply is the subcostal artery, lumbar arteries, iliolumbar artery, and the nerve innervation is spinal nerves, thoracic 12, and upper lumbar spinal nerves. And the bony landmarks of the spine, there's the cervical vertebrae, and like you can really feel this when like you're sitting up and forward. So it is that first like large bump that you feel there. And then the thoracic vertebrae 12, this is where the floating ribs connect. And then the sacrum is also like the last part of this the spine, and it's just a Y bone that connects the spine to the pelvis. So next is the thoracic muscles, and these thoracic muscles make up the chest, and these are responsible for respiration, so breathing in and then breathing out. So first up is the external intercostal. Intercostals. The origin for these are the lower border of the ribs from 1 through 11. The incision is the upper border of the ribs below 2 through 12. The action is that it elevates the ribs. Blood supply is the intercostal arteries, and the nerve innervation is intercostal nerves. All right, then we have the deep thorax muscles, the intercostal. In the intercostal, nerve muscles, the origin for this is the superior border of ribs 2 through 12. The insertion is the inferior border of ribs 1 through 11. The action is that it depresses the ribs, so it is responsible for the exhaling process of respiration. And the blood supply is the intercostal arteries, and the nerve innervation is the intercostal nerves. Okay, and then next is the diaphragm. The diaphragm is a really important muscle because it helps you to lift heavy weights and objects. So it really supports the abdomen area, and is also known as like one of like the strongest muscles of the trunk area and spine area. So the origin for this is the exmoid process, and the cartilages of ribs 7 through 12, the anterior surfaces of the lumbar spine. The insertion for this is the central tendon that blends with the anterior longitudinal ligament of the vertebral column. The action is that it depresses the ribs, so it is also responsible for the exhaling motion process. And then the blood supply for this is the superior and inferior phrenic arteries, musculophrenic artery, and the pericardiophrenic artery. The nerve supply is the phrenic nerve. Then the bony landmarks for this would be the clavicles. The clavicles do attach to the glenohumeral joint over here. They do kind of dip down between the rib cage, so you can easily feel these, also known as the collarbone. The collarbones. And then another one is the jugular notch of the sternum. This is kind of where the skin depresses. You can find the top of the mandible through here. And then the ribs, I was researching that is also considered a bony landmark, and the costa margins, which is kind of like a V shape that shapes the upper chest area. And then the abdomen muscles, there's the rectus abdominis. The origin for this is the crest and pubic tubercle, the front of the pubic symphysis. Insertion is the pubis, cartilage of the 5th, 6th, and 7th ribs, and exmoid process. Action is that it flexes the spine, tenses abdominal wall, and compresses abdominal viscera. So the blood supply is the inferior epigastric artery, and the nerve innervation is spinal nerves, vertebrae 7 through 12. Next is the external obliques. And then the origin for this is the sternum, external surfaces, and inferior borders of the lower 8 ribs. The insertion is the pubis in the iliac crest. And the action is that it compresses the abdomen and flexes or bends the spine. Blood supply is the intercostal arteries, subcostal artery, deep circumflex iliac artery. Nerve innervation is that is the lower intercostal iliohypogastric and ilioluminal nerve line. Then there's the internal obliques, and this is the origin is the lateral half of the inguinal ligament, middle of iliac crest, and the lumbodorsal insertion is the pubis, inferior border of the 3 to 4 ribs, and the linea alba. The action is that it compresses the abdomen and flexes and bends the spine. And the blood supply is the intercostal arteries, subcostal arteries, and nerve supply is the lower 5 thoracic nerves, and first nerve and thoracic, which is T12 through lumbar 1. And then there's the transverse abdominis. So the origin for this is the inguinal ligament, lumbar fascial cartilages of the last 6 ribs, iliac crest, and the insertion is the linea alba pubic crest. And the action is that it compresses the abdomen and tenses the abdominal wall. The blood supply is the subcostal arteries. The nerve supply is the lower 6 thoracic nerves, first lumbar nerve, and iliohypogastric, and the ilioluminal nerves. All right, so one of the 2 conditions is torticollis, and this is especially found in newborn infants. This is where kind of the neck is stuck in a position, downward position, and it can be seen right at birth, and it's just kind of where the sternocleidomastoid just presses down, but they're the faster one points this out, and the faster one can fix this, it is fixable. The infant will have to go to physical therapy, and adults can also get it too. So, and then next up is a hernia. Ignore this picture. And this is where the organ pushes through a weak spot through the muscles, and you can kind of feel it when you, if you do have it, you can feel it when you stand up. So one usually notices a lump that disappears when lying down and feels the point of pain or discomfort when standing up. And then this can be due, you can get this from lifting too heavy, just coughing too much. It can also be caused from injury or surgery. And yeah, but you can recover from it. Surgery is the only effective way to fully recover from a hernia. And one interesting thing that I found throughout all this, it's not up here, but I did find that lower back pain is taking a big economic toll on the U.S. economy, with it being over $100 billion industry. So $100 billion go to lower back pain, and it's one of the most common injuries within the United States. So I just found that crazy that it's the $100 billion industry. And for the activity, I just found some more coloring pages. Just some more coloring pages about the trunk and spine. So here's mostly the abdomen area.
So Val, you got to do a new share with your screen because we're still seeing your PowerPoint.
Oh, okay. So new share. So just go here. Okay. So here, can you guys see it now?
Yep.
Okay. So here's another coloring page with the abdomen, and then there's also a spinal one. Had it. Yep. So here's the muscles of the back, and so you can just color that in, label it. Yeah. So thank you for listening.
Awesome. Thanks. Okay. So just a few things I want to kind of focus on for this lab. For this unit, use what Val gave you for like the origin, insertion, and actions and things like that. But for purposes of studying for your next practical exam, focus on like the location of the muscles, how they're layered, how they're located in relation to each other. Because like with the abdominal muscles, for example, again, they're all layered. So we want to look at, you know, which ones are superficial, which ones are intermediate, which ones are deep. So again, focus more on their like location in comparison to each other and their actions. But you do need the origin, insertion, and all that stuff for your lab homework. So I just want to kind of go over some tricks that I have to kind of help you with the actions of some of these, because some of them are kind of tricky. I'm working on sharing my screen here. Okay, I'm going to skip through a lot of this. Again, when we think about cervical movements, the only cervical muscle that we're concerned with in our lab is the sternocleidomastoid. And the sternocleidomastoid is going to make like a V shape here. And we'll talk about which of the actions that it can do here in just a second. Again, when we think about the kind of comparing and contrasting movement potential for, you know, the cervical, the thoracic, and the lumbar regions, again, remember that within the thoracic region, we don't really have much movement at all. Whereas within the lumbar region, a lot of you have more movement than I do, but, you know, you have a fair amount of movement in the lumbar region and certainly in the cervical region as well. Okay, so the aggregate muscle group of the erector spinae is the spinalis longissimus and iliocostalis. Again, I want you to think about where they're located in comparison to each other. So spinalis is going to be your most medial of the erector spinae muscles. Again, it tells you where it attaches. So it attaches on those spinous processes of the vertebrae. The intermediate of the three is the longissimus. Again, it's one of the longest muscles in the body. It spans from kind of like the back of your, or the top of your cervical spine all the way down to the lumbar region. And then lastly, iliocostalis is going to be the most lateral of the three. Again, all three of these muscles have the same exact action, so that's super helpful. So the only thing you need to know to kind of differentiate them is where they are in location in comparison to each other. Okay. Sternocleidomastoid, again, he's kind of his own beast, so we'll talk about him kind of separately. However, he has the same actions as the external obliques, and that'll make sense once we kind of look at those fiber arrangements. Yeah, let's do it. So again, when we think about spinalis or those erector spinae muscles, I want you to think about their actions in kind of two different ways. Okay, so we can look at their bilateral action or their unilateral action. Okay, so again, think of them as paired. So you can see my pointer, right? Let me do this. Okay, so the spinalis is kind of hard to see because it looks like it's all one, but notice like in the middle, there's a small line here. And it's really two separate muscles. So it looks like it's a bipinnate arrangement, like these fibers are running this direction. You know what I started doing yesterday? I started using this little pin, and I'm super excited about it. So some of them run like this way, and the other side kind of runs like this way. Okay, so again, they're kind of two separate muscles, if that makes sense. When we activate both sides at the same time, then that causes extension of the spine, okay? So that's what allows us to sit upright, essentially, okay? It can also help with hyperextension as well, but its major job is to just like keep us upright, okay? So that's its bilateral action. Now, when we think about its unilateral action, it'll cause lateral flexion on the same side, Okay, so if I were to activate my right spinalis, I would get right lateral flexion. Okay, so again, let's review those actions real quick. I'm gonna make you stand up. So I decided to stay home today because I wanted to see if my internet worked better, and I haven't had it cut out one time. So I guess it's better to just stay here and not have any models. All right, so again, show me extension of the spine is just regular position. Hyperextension, again, I can lean back, okay? Flexion of the spine or of the lumbar region. Again, remember, I can put myself in a supine position and do like a sit-up. That's gonna be flexion of the spine versus extension of the spine, okay? Or of the lumbar region, I don't care how you list it. Okay, so again, when we think about lateral flexion, show me lateral flexion. What's lateral flexion look like? Yep. Okay, what plane of motion is lateral flexion occurring in?
Frontal.
Frontal. Okay, what plane of motion was flexion and extension occurring in?
Sagittal.
Yep, sagittal. Very good. Okay, so again, when I activate the right spinalis, I get right lateral flexion. Okay, that's true with spinalis, longissimus, and iliocostalis. All three of them are going to result in unilateral lateral flexion on the same side. Does that make sense? Okay. Again, longissimus is the intermediate of the three. Iliocostalis is the most lateral of the three. Okay. So now I want to talk about sternocleidomastoid. This one's kind of tricky in terms of getting which side does which action. Okay. So again, I would encourage you to use like I usually use like a band when I'm in the lab. I have a stretchy heart rate monitor strap that I found at my house that I was going to use today. Right. So again, imagine that the fibers make like this V shape. Okay. So when I activate both sides at the same time, it causes lateral flexion, okay? So you can see that my heart rate strap needs to shorten as I do lateral flexion. Or I'm sorry, regular flexion, just flexion. Yes? Okay. Now unilaterally, if I only contract one side or the other, I can get lateral flexion on the same side. Okay, so again, this is my right sternocleidomastoid. It'll cause right lateral flexion. Again, you can see the band get loose as I do right lateral flexion. Yes? Okay, now this is the trickiest part. Now, when we think about rotation, again, you're going to need to differentiate between rotation to the left and rotation to the right. Okay, so with my right sternocleidomastoid, if I rotate to the right, the band gets tighter, okay? So that's how I stretch that side. If I rotate to the left, the band loosens, okay? So unilaterally, it rotates to the opposite side. So right sternocleidomastoid helps with left rotation. Does that sound reasonable? Okay. So it can do three things. It can do regular flexion bilaterally, can do unilateral flexion on the same side, and it can do rotation to the opposite direction. And again, if you just use something, it doesn't need to be stretchy, even like a shoelace or something like that. If you hold it tight and then try those actions and see if it stretches it or if it loosens it, that'll tell you which way is the right way. So that's an easy trick to try. Again, if it loosens it, that means that's the action, right? Because that would result in shortening of the muscle. If it stretches, then that tells us that's the opposite, right? That's going to be the way we would stretch that particular muscle. Okay. I'm trying to think if there was anything else to mention with the intercostals. Again, don't worry necessarily for exams about the origin and insertion, but do worry about the actions, okay? So the external intercostals are important for inspiration, so we're going to use those every single day, all the time, in order to bring air in. But expiration is actually generally passive. So all we do in order to expire or to let the air out is just relax those external intercostal muscles. The only time that we use the intercostals is if we're trying to forcefully expire. So if we do exercise, or if we're like gonna play an instrument or sing or something along those lines where I'm trying to control my breathing, then I will activate these internal intercostal muscles. But like in our normal everyday life, we're just gonna use external intercostals. So many people have very, very underdeveloped intercostals because they don't forcefully expire. They don't play an instrument. They don't, run. They don't do any like yoga or anything like that that would cause us to think about forcefully expiring. Okay. Again, I mentioned that we want to kind of take a look at how these abdominal muscles are layered. So really 4 muscles within this area, super important that they're strong because their job is to protect some of these vital organs and there's no bones on top of them. So they have to be pretty darn strong in order to kind of protect what's going on underneath here. All right, so the deepest of the layers is the transverse abdominis, and again, that's going to make like a circle basically. So it's going to just surround us this way. Okay, so it just runs like a circle or a cylinder around the deepest layer of the abdominal muscles. The next layer is internal abdominal obliques, and again, look at their fiber arrangement. They're going to run like this, so they run diagonally this way. Okay, the next layer, I would say external obliques and rectus abdominis are kind of like on the same level. They're going to be the most external in nature. External abdominal obliques, think about putting your hand in your pocket, and that's the way that they run. So they're going to run kind of diagonally this way. Okay. So again, if you see people that kind of have like that cut section down here, like kind of like what I have going on right now, that's the external obliques that you can kind of see that the muscle tone there. Okay. So external abdominal obliques, think about putting your hands in your pockets. Internal abdominal obliques are going to run in opposition. So they're going to run like that way. Okay. And then rectus abdominis are going to run straight up and down. Okay. Again, when we think about their actions, rectus abdominis, super easy. It's going to help us with flexion of the spine. So that's easy enough. Transverse abdominis doesn't really like do a lot in regards to movement. However, it's super important in relation to keeping us protected. Again, external and internal obliques are a little bit tricky when we think about these actions bilaterally versus unilaterally, okay? So bilaterally, again, if I were to flex both sides at the same time, here's my external obliques. You can't see it on me because mine don't really do anything right now. But if this were you, you would see the band kind of loosen as you bend forward. Okay, mine don't exist right now, so I don't know what's up with that. So bilaterally, we'll see flexion of the lumbar spine, okay? Unilaterally, 2 different things. Unilaterally, it can do lateral rotation to the same side, okay? So again, my right external obliques help with right lateral flexion. And then just like we saw with the sternocleidomastoid, they're going to cause rotation in the opposite way. So right external obliques help with left rotation, okay? Again, if you think about the fiber arrangement, it's the same here as it is down here. They're both diagonally like making a V shape. So they have the same actions, just different location, okay? So sternocleidomastoid is going to do the same thing in the neck as what external obliques do in the lumbar region, okay? The only difference that we see with internal obliques is that rotary piece, okay? So bilaterally, they still cause flexion. They also cause lateral flexion on the same side. So my right internal oblique right? Lateral flexion, but they're going to do rotation to the same direction. Okay, so again, my right internal oblique causes right rotation. Okay, so that's the major difference between internal external obliques, is which way it causes that rotation to occur. Oh, quadratus lumborum. I don't think we talked much about this one. This one is like located, let's see if I got a picture. Yeah. So here you can see it's kind of on the posterior side. It's just slightly lateral and also deep in comparison to the iliocostalis. And it can do two things. So bilaterally, it helps with inhalation and exhalation of those floating ribs. Can also help with lumbar extension as well. But unilaterally, it does something kind of unique. It does helps us elevate our pelvis or do what's known as the hip hiker motion or a lateral tilt. So hip hiker or lateral tilt would be like this, like being able to do this, lift up that one side, okay? Why would you ever want to do that? Why do you want to do a hip hiker or a lateral tilt? In what scenarios might that be important?
Rock climbing.
Sure, rock climbing, yeah. Anything else? Anything like daily living you can think of? Where I might need to go like this? I was telling my husband just the other day that you guys like take for granted like your core muscles and like what they do, and you don't realize how much you use them until you don't have them anymore. So things like, climbing into a car, right? So if the seat is up high, maybe I'm getting into a truck or something like that. So I kind of have to lift up that hip in order to get up that big step or whatever. That's one example. Again, if I want to try and reach something off a top shelf, I can kind of lift up that hip to get just another inch or so out of it. Playing basketball, if I'm going to shoot a layup, again, I'm going to use that hip hiker motion. High jump would be another example. So lots of times to use it in sport, but in general life, again, if it's something where I want to kind of reach up just a little bit higher, I might use that as well. So some examples of how we might use that. So that's the lateral tilt of our pelvis. Also helps with lateral flexion on the same side. So again, if I activate my right quadratus lumborum, that's going to help with right lateral flexion. Okay. I think that's it for that. Let me look at my notes and see if there was anything else I wanted to mention to you guys today. Any questions on anything in life? We're okay? Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So again, just focus on the difference between the bilateral and unilateral movements, muscle location in comparison to each other, and also like the layering like we talked about with abdominal muscles. Let's see. Tomorrow you have a quiz. I also have listed that you're doing lower extremity musculature, but I'm going to do that on Friday in class because it's going to be like more charts like we did with upper extremity musculature. So I'll have you guys like work in groups in order to do those charts for the lower extremity. So really all you have tomorrow is just a quiz and then this lab is due. You could do the endocrine lecture early though if you wanted. That one's for Friday. So you could do that one tomorrow instead if you wanted to. But yeah, otherwise, if there's no questions, I think I have your practicals are all graded and those looked really great. I'll get lab number 7 finished up grading today. I think I did half of them this morning. I'll finish the rest of them. So Anything else for the good of the order?
How are the babies?
They're good. They just gotta stay in there. They need to just stay in there. I'm just so paranoid that they're gonna be super early because I don't have a like great summer plan yet for the rest of our classes. I'm like working as hard as I can to get everything ready, but it's not ready yet. So they gotta stay in there. They need to stay in there.
What's like the earliest like a baby can come out? If it's like 9 months and like
They can come out anytime.
any
We're at
oh
like
like once.
they're at like a 99% survival rate right now. So
Okay.
they could come out anytime. They're like 4 pounds each right now. So they can come out. Yeah, I'm bigger now than I was when I delivered Breck. So like they're getting going in there. But I need to make it to, I'm 32 weeks today. I got to make it to 34 weeks to be able to stay in Dubuque at their hospital and not get transferred to Iowa City. So that's like the next goal. And then the next goal is like 37 weeks because then they don't have to go to the NICU. So yeah, just keeping my legs crossed and just keeping them there. So running going good?
Yeah.
Good. Awesome. Are you guys both doing I'm going to hit stop recording.